continuously asked to maximize efficiencies and cut costs in order to increase profitability. And with labor being one of the biggest expenses in business, it's only natural that companies are always looking at ways to better manage their workforce. We want to talk to you today about the trends in talent management and the different workforce management solutions out there to help you deal with them. Our goal is for you to leave this presentation better equipped to make informed decisions about your workforce and the best solution for you. So before we get into today's topic, I do want to take a minute to introduce myself and our guest speakers. I'm Bradley Pearson, Managing Director of the Americas for Hayes' outsourced recruitment division, Hayes Talent Solutions. I joined Hayes in 2012 when Hayes purchased our proprietary VMS platform, 3-Story Software, for which I was the COO. Now I'm responsible for leading the Hayes Talent Solutions in the Americas, ensuring our clients retain a competitive advantage in talent acquisition from Hayes' MSP and RPO services. Also, I'm very excited today to welcome Kellie Pryce, who is responsible for setting the talent, resourcing, and PM strategy in EMEA for Sony. Kellie's experience on this webinar is invaluable as she has worked for companies such as Telefonica, Fujitsu, Cielo, and Hayes. She's worked both sides of the table in the world of resourcing and will be providing her first-hand experience of how Sony regained control of their non-permanent workforce. Finally, we'll also hear briefly from Travis O'Rourke. Travis has expertise in contingent workforce management. He's been specialized in temporary and contract workers for the past 15 years and is a member of the National Association of the Canadian Consulting Business Board of Directors. He's going to give some insights into the specific legal trends we're seeing today in the U.S. and Canada to help you know what's coming down the pipe so you can prepare. So without further ado, let's get into today's topic. First, let's talk about the current landscape. You can't look at any current article on workforce trends without reading about the gig economy and the increasing use of contingent workers. But beyond coverage by mainstream media, this is of particular importance and interest to employers and business leaders because it represents a significant shift in the talent pool. In late 2015, Harvard labor economist Lawrence Katz and Princeton's Alan Kruger found that 15.8% of workers were engaged in temporary work arrangements, a 10% increase from a decade prior. And in Canada, the story is similar, with temp work rising at a rate 50% faster in the last decade than permanent hiring. Interestingly, the proportion of contingent workers we see in some of our clients in some sectors exceeds these statistics. At one of our clients, over 45% of the workforce is made up of contingent workers. Deloitte's 2016 Human Capital Trends Report surveyed over 7,000 executives and found 42% plan to increase or significantly increase the use of contingent workers over the next 3 to 5 years, and only 16% of executives expect to decrease the size of their contingent workforce. According to the survey, 62% of Canadian executives surveyed rated the top trend towards a more flexible workforce as important or very important. A study from Intuit, the company behind QuickBooks and other financial software, estimates that 40% of the workforce in the United States, nearly 60 million workers, will be freelance by 2020, while PricewaterhouseCoopers' Future of Work report finds that almost half of HR professionals expect at least 20% of their workforce will be made up of contractors by 2022. So I think it's safe to say that we should all expect to see an increase in contingent labor in the coming years. So what does all this mean for you as buyers of non-permanent workforce? Today, getting a grip on that non-permanent workforce is imperative to success. However, employing contingent workers comes with bigger compliance risk than employing permanent workers. So while 95% of organizations say contingent labor is vital according to Ardent Partners' Contingent Workforce Management Report, only 19% of executives surveyed believe their companies fully understand the labor laws that govern contingent workers, and only 11% have complete management processes for the contingent part of the workforce. This is something we can definitely attest to, having seen temp workers coded as things such as office supplies in some of our clients, so that lack of control is very evident. Contingent workforce management is an exciting but complex field that increasingly requires specialization. Just a few years ago, Staffing Industry Analyst, or SIA, launched a certification course in contingent workforce management, showing that it's something that requires specialized skills and experience. Technology allowing global communication and collaboration makes it easier than ever to make the most of a workforce available beyond your neighborhood. And we're seeing an increasing proportion of the workforce embrace this type of work, making the 9-to-5 workday obsolete. People are taking calls on their commutes, emailing on their weekend breaks, and getting work done at home. They're developing expertise and enjoy project hopping, exposure to multiple companies, and working styles, meaning if you aren't tapping into this talent pool, then you're missing out on one of the most important factors of any staffing program, quality talent. However, with all of this comes new regulation. For example, organizations must now track this evolving concept of time worked rather than simply tracking hours spent at the office. For example, the U.S. government is changing FLSA laws for the first time in over a decade to reclassify which employees are eligible for overtime protection. This update will impact more than 4 million workers and force many organizations to revisit the way they track time worked. So what are the major challenges that make all of this so complex? The Internal Revenue Service in the U.S. estimates that employers have misclassified millions of workers nationally as independent contractors. This is worrying, and mismanaging your contingent workforce could lead to issues such as co-employment and reclassification, as well as tax penalties and liabilities. We've seen big names go through huge class action lawsuits and fines that could easily have been avoided. According to SIA's 2016 MSP Market Developments Report, minimizing risk of noncompliance is one of the top 6 drivers for using an MSP. And for us, this is probably the main reason we see people use our services. Organizations with modern workforce management systems can automate processes such as employee pay and time conditions to eliminate errors, enforce policies, and reduce these risks. Automated rules, alerts, and a complete audit trail ensure time worked is tracked properly and that workers are appropriately certified and that all applicable laws and regulations have been adhered to. For some organizations, it's been worth investing in the internal experts to manage that workforce. But for most, it's falling on the same HR and payroll staff who oversee the full-time workers. That lack of expertise leaves companies vulnerable to audits, class action suits, and PR problems. But instead of trying to manage it internally, many organizations are choosing to outsource that expertise, either in part or in full, to companies that specialize in overseeing contingent workforces and have the checkpoints in place to ensure compliance and reduce risk. For example, independent contractor payment service providers can even give certain levels of guarantees against misclassification lawsuits. Managing a non-permanent workforce requires significant insight and visibility across your entire organization. How many contingent workers are engaged by your company? Where are they located? How are they managed efficiently as a group and as individuals? In the Arden Partners report, this was cited as the most common challenge faced in contingent workforce management, with 48% citing lack of intelligence and visibility as a key challenge. Even in a medium-sized organization, you could have hiring managers with budget and approval for hiring contingent workers. These workers are almost invisible for most companies, and the bigger your company, the bigger the potential for rogue spend. It's not uncommon to have hundreds of different hiring managers with the ability to hire ad hoc labor without any visibility for HR or procurement. Centralizing and using tools to track contingent workers means that you know exactly who is working for you, for how long, what they are doing, where they are located, and what the cost is. For example, if you have 3 different managers hiring a short-term systems administrator through 3 different suppliers within the same city, you're likely paying 3 different rates, and probably too much for at least one of those. It's also possible that you only need one person to do all 3 of those jobs, but you'll never know that if you're not tracking who is working for you. Simply by putting all of this information in one place can help. The data tracked by these tools enables organizations to run analytics on workforce processes to spot problems and correct them, ensuring better use of existing resources. In short, you can't manage what you can't see. Referring back to the Arden Partners report, 45% said reducing cost or generating savings was a primary reason they looked at a solution such as an MSP. According to the most recent SIA Workforce Solutions Buyer Survey, the top priority for contingent workforce programs in 2016 was reducing or at least controlling costs. Most organizations think of cost management as negotiating staffing vendor markups. However, most don't have an accurate view of the going market rate. MSP vendors have the benefit of being able to negotiate with suppliers across their entire supply base and can bring purchasing power and greater supplier insights to the conversation. As the hiring of non-permanent workers is generally disparate, organizations will often pay varying rates for the same category of resources. By standardizing pricing models, comparing them to the market, and ensuring this is recorded in a central place, you can be confident that you're not paying too much. Cost reductions can also come from using supplier performance metrics to ensure effective supplier negotiations and the development of appropriate sourcing strategies. For example, as we increasingly see skilled workers become freelancers, independent contractors, and consultants, you'll need to proactively examine your workforce to clearly identify which positions will need to be filled in the future increases. You must be able to readily access the best possible talent for the job and do this at fair market value. We commonly see individuals engaged as consultants at an elevated cost to the business when the same individual has been previously or could have been engaged as a contractor at a lower cost to the organization. Better planning and control allows you to avoid constantly scrambling at the last minute to find qualified talent and as a result paying too much. Ensuring that you have visibility into upcoming projects and their impact on workloads allows you to ramp up the hiring process in advance of the planned start date. This may begin with communicating with your internal and current talent pool that a major project will start in a few months so that you can ascertain who's interested and available rather than scrambling to procure talent at the last minute. A solid internal talent attraction strategy will often lead to your most cost-effective hires, and as you save money on the cost of vendor markups, you'll also save on sourcing costs. Increasingly, we're seeing alternative sourcing channels and using the quote-unquote right routes to market that are driving the highest savings, at least once the initial rate management and rationalization process is complete. For contingent workers in particular, your central database can be a gold mine. It will contain people who have previously worked for you. They're tried and tested people who have been screened, vetted, and onboarded with the skills, experience, and cultural fit you're looking for. Efforts to build the relationship with these workers can pay off in the long run and should be one of your first ports of call. Using temp and contingent workers is often a cost saving in and of itself. With 64% of buyers saying they reduced expenses by using contingent workers, and of those that have an MSP in place, 84% reported cost savings. While we do see a considerable amount of savings in outsourcing, I would stress that this is not necessarily the primary driver, and it's not immediate. Historically, a large portion of the savings generated when outsourcing came from the improvement of processes, which, as anyone who has any change management experience can tell you, takes time. When you examine the amount of time and energy spent by hiring managers, internal recruiters, as well as finance and procurement on contingent workforce management, it's not hard to find a lot of inefficiencies in the process. Scrambling at the last minute to find resources, relying on staffing vendors to find the candidates, and then having to qualify, onboard, and set them up for payment can be quite cumbersome. The value comes from analyzing all this activity and finding ways to automate, offload, and streamline the process. When you outsource, an MSP can advise on all of this. The MSP should handle the entire sourcing function, manage job requisitions, execute on and offboarding, and provide a single consolidated invoice for all non-permanent workers that is properly coded and reported in a way that is meaningful to you, freeing up the highly valuable time of HR, procurement, and finance to do more important things. However, clients who look to outsource purely as a cost savings tool will find that it takes at least one full cycle to see results. Start by reducing your risk, increasing your visibility, and reviewing your existing processes, and the cost savings will soon follow. I'm now going to hand it over to Travis O'Rourke to talk a bit about the details he's seeing in the U.S. and Canada that are either increasing the risk of contingent workers or making it more complicated to know when you're compliant. Travis, over to you.
Thanks, Bradley. Cost savings is it's a term that's in fact not always immeasurable. And this is especially true when considering the unknowns related to whether it's government audits or civil legal proceedings. The fiscal importance of knowing where your workforce is and how they're classified or how they're being treated or managed is immense. Every situation is case by case and requires expert review, as the financial ramifications of a failure in any of these areas is at the very least frightening. Today, it's estimated that between 65 million workers, now that comes from a McKinsey report from the weekend, in the U.S. alone are independent. So how many of these workers are on your sites right now? What exactly is an independent worker, or what's a dependent worker? How about an independent contractor or a temporary employee? Are they an employee even though they are temporary? And what if a staffing agency sits in the middle? In a recent court ruling against a user of workers, a large user of workers, the court compared the case as trying to fit a square peg into one of two round holes, those being independent contractor or employee. But the black and white comparison no longer exists. The lines are all blurring together, and it's on you, or ideally your MSP, to decide. The correct ruling lies within the intricacies of each situation, and if you don't know, engaging the proper third-party advice is a necessity. Because I'll tell you one thing, if you don't know, there's a very willing third party in the IRS who is willing to help you find out. The only problem is you may find them more interested in helping after the fact. They've estimated they're losing several billions of dollars every year due to the misclassification of workers, and they've moved forward with hiring an additional 500 to 700 investigation agents. Now, although these agents don't yet have a dedicated space, many industry experts are predicting a greater focus specifically on misclassified independent contractors. So the key to mitigating risk for employers really lies in the information that you have available to you today. I can't stress it enough, Bradley has already. Get yourself either an electronic system or a time capture tool and keep it all in one place. Because there are many acceptable scenarios where companies can engage workers and classify them correctly either as an independent contractor or an employee. Again, you just need the right information. So Hayes highly advises hiring a third party who has an impartial perspective to your environment as a dedicated independent contractor expert. Your MSP will ensure that all of this IC compliance is done properly and that each independent worker that you have is engaged safely and efficiently. Take a little bit closer look at Canada now. There we go. Honestly, pretty much everything I've said about the U.S., you can echo for Canada. The Canadian government and CRA are going through the exact same internal and external reviews regarding the definition of workers and who is responsible for them. In Ontario specifically, they're putting a lot of their focus into legislative changes. If Ontario, or if history tells us anything, if Ontario goes first, the rest of the country is soon to follow, especially with Liberal governments that are very closely tied together right now. But again, the power and the key to compliancy lies within the information that you can collect. Because rather quietly, last year, the Ontario government bolted Bill 18 and Bill 146 together, the Stronger Workplaces for a Stronger Economy, and made it crucial for employers to implement some sort of vendor management or time capture system in order to provide visibility for their entire temporary or contract workforce. The legislation specifically states that every client must track every hour for every worker either engaged directly or by a staffing agency and keep full detailed records for a period of 3 years. The audits will be beginning very, very soon. And again, to summarize, if you've had a temporary worker on your site in the last 3 years, if you don't have an electronic record of their address, their name, their wages, how long they worked, you could put yourself into a difficult position when the auditors come knocking. This bill specifically also included some changes to the WorkSafe Insurance Act. Without kind of going too deep into them, I'm happy to pick up any discussions offline with those who have any kind of questions surrounding the impact. Staying in Ontario, the government last year appointed 2 special advisors to conduct province-wide consultations to seek input in how the ESA and the LRA can better respond to these changes that we're seeing in the workplace. The initiative, properly named, has been coined the Changing Workplaces Review. It's a review kind of largely in part due to the immense growth in the contingent workforce space, specifically temporary or contract workers in Canada. The Ministry of Labour has a mandate to modernize employment and labour laws as they're seeing employers engage these workers in different ways. And although the intent is morally sound and aimed at strengthening protections for vulnerable and precarious workers, it does have ramifications that sweep from your $14 an hour call center employee to your $160 an hour IT worker. I know no changes have been recommended as of yet. The deadline to provide feedback is actually tomorrow, but the report in itself focuses on two sections. The first addresses LRA reform. Most options in this section orient towards decreasing the use of temporary labor and increasing unionization rates. Now, this isn't surprising, given that the unions kind of dominated the volume of submissions during the consultation process, but nonetheless, it is a major focus, and it can't be ignored. The second part deals with the ESA, and to be frank, every section of the ESA is addressed in one way or another, but the bottom line is that in Ontario, it's highly likely that sweeping change is coming across the use of temporary and contract workers. And in order to know how these changes will affect your business, you obviously need to know where your exposure currently lies. I'd encourage you to get yourself any sort of electronic workforce solution that's out there and ensure that you know every worker's status and exactly how they are being engaged or managed. Bradley, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Travis. So next up, we'll talk about Sony and the journey that they went through, and we'll get Kellie Pryce to walk us through how they regained control of their contingent workforce across EMEA.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody from the UK. So just in terms of what actually happened from a Sony perspective, I'd like to start by actually taking you back to before April 2015. Where we basically had contractors under a variety of contractual terms and conditions. We actually had no idea in terms of the number of agencies that we had been recruiting through across Europe. And we were even unsure of the locations of these contractors. So Sony, we're electronics in Europe. We are across 28 different countries, and we actually had no record of our non-permanent headcount. We were even unsure of their length of service. So as it transpired, we actually had contractors that had been with us on significant day rates for over 20 years. This also provided us no external benchmarking, so we were not challenging each other on our daily rates, whether they were too high or too low. We had no electronic timesheets, so everything was done manually and tracked paper trail. And this, of course, led to a number of issues. So our temps were not being paid, and if they were being paid, it was incorrectly. And this was leading, we were towards the end, I think, about 60 escalations per week. And also our business was going direct to a huge number of suppliers, so we had no control over the terms and conditions that were being agreed. We had no control over our notice periods. We had no control over our fees. And finally, and I think this was mentioned earlier in the call as well, we had no check in terms of our liability, our insurances, our compliance. We generally just didn't know whether we were compliant, and subsequently we actually have had to pay out significantly large amounts of money to certain contractors across some of our European countries. So we then introduced Hays into the mix, and so now and then they rolled out for us across Europe. It was a mammoth task. We had every country in Europe that we are in had its own legislation in terms of how you can engage with contractors. So there was a lot of complexity there in terms of the actual project itself. We didn't even know the numbers and what countries we were necessarily dealing with. So Hays were very supportive in helping us find all those individuals. So where are we now? Well, we have the uniformity with all of our temps and contractors in regards to our terms and conditions. So we know that one contractor is on the same terms and conditions as another contractor in a predominantly different country or a different team. We're confident now that we're compliant with local legislation across all of the relevant countries. We've worked really closely with Hays and also with our external legal support to make sure that our contracts are watertight, and we are absolutely covered. Our timesheets are now electronic, so we use 3SS, and this is a full audit trail for us, and we've had some great feedback from contractors as well in terms of the speed and the visibility that they have. So this is not just a benefit to us as an organisation, but also to our temps and contractors. We're actually able to identify our temps and contractors for the first time. So we can now run a report and immediately identify our non-permanent spend across all 28 of our countries. We can track our length of service, and our rates are benchmarked, and our time to hire is reduced. And we collate this data in the service reviews that Hays run with ourselves, and we monitor our KPIs and SLAs in those service reviews. We've also increased the scope, so we're looking at taking on the Sony promoters, and also we are opening this particular MSP to our Sony mobile business as well. So it's generally getting larger and larger as everyone within our organisation, our Sony sister companies, are starting to see the value that's added to us. We've reduced the number of agencies supplying to Sony significantly. And finally, what's really worked for us as well is, our in-house team does the permanent recruitment, but we actually now go to Hays as a priority supplier for all of our permanent requirements where our internal team are not able to deliver. So that absolutely gives them the full scope of our roles and understanding of our culture and our organisation. And I think, again, savings were muted earlier, and one of the things we have now started to monitor is savings, and now we're over 12 months into the project. We can see that last year alone we saved over €4 million. So, this was great for us. So it's been a really positive story. On that note, Bradley, I'd like to hand back over to yourselves. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly. I appreciate you giving your insights and experience on that. So, as we've seen, getting the most of your contingent workforce comes down to two primary things: centralizing and tracking activity. So how do you get started? First, know your numbers. Get as much of your data as you can in one place. Evaluate your current usage and spend. If you don't know the answers to the questions, it's probably time to look at a centralized system, such as a vendor management or VMS system, to track the key performance indicators and automate the processes. But don't focus just on those vendor markups and cost savings. These will come out with a well-managed process. Again, experts such as those who monitor market rates or offer workforce management systems will be able to advise on benchmarks and what you should be measuring and the best way to do this. Second, assess where your biggest risks are and the inefficiencies that are coming from that, and what processes and contracts are in place that are driving those behaviors. If you're facing multiple processes for different departments, business units, and locations, sharing best practice and demonstrating the positive impact this has had can be a good place to start. Centralizing and simplifying the process will prevent hiring from spiraling out of control. Key to this will be managing change, so don't be afraid to ask for expert advice. For example, you can call an outsourcing supplier and ask a lot of questions to understand what they offer and what might solve the specific problems you are facing. Typically, we find clients engaging with a number of suppliers and assessing what they should be doing. This allows varied opinion and the ability to make sure you come up with the right solutions for your particular business. Finally, put all this insight and best practice to work. Automate where you can, such as billing and payment processes or releasing vacancies to vendors, and review your suppliers and renegotiate your rate cards or pricing structure. So those are all the slides we have for today. I'd like to thank Kelly and Travis for joining us today. We've left a few minutes here for questions, and if you'd like to send those through to either myself or the webinar host, we will answer as many of them as we can. So now's a good time to ask questions. So, Kelly, we've actually gotten a question come in for you, and the question is, how were you able to get buy-in across Europe and the different countries for Sony?
Thank you. A really good question. So we started pretty much right at the top of our organisation. I worked very closely with my colleagues in procurement, and we spoke directly with country heads. They all felt the pain anyway of having the issues that we were having, and we had to work really closely with our partners in local HR as well for them to buy in to the solution. I'm not saying that it was completely plain sailing. It wasn't. We did have some pushback. Some people didn't really like being told how they were going to be supplied to, and we still have a few, I suppose, concerns that we have to deal with from our internal stakeholders in that respect. However, with the ones that we now have rolled out to, they absolutely see the benefits of it, and we're using them to also share that good news story to where people have more concerns. So it's still a little bit of a work in progress, but we absolutely have got everybody on board, and where, again, it's worked very well from a Hays perspective is once they've started delivering into the areas where the business felt that potentially they were not able to and deliver well, people have absolutely bought into that, and they can see the cost savings as well. So there's the tangible benefits as well. But also, it takes less time to get the contractor in. So it has been very much a work in progress, and it will continue to be so for a little while. But it's, the business absolutely is engaged now. But I think it is making sure you engage right at the top to start off with. I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Kelly. So we've got another question just come through. It says, I don't think I spend enough on temp workers to justify outsourcing my contingent workforce. What do you recommend I do to reduce my risk? Well, first thing I would say is don't assume that you don't spend enough on contingent workers. There's a couple of things to that. One, we find that most companies don't really know how much they spend. So unless you already have an effective way of tracking your workforce, it's difficult to say with any precision how much you spend. And also, as the programs are becoming more efficient, or the program providers are becoming more efficient, they're able to deliver programs to smaller organizations, so that their efficiency of process allows them to have an MSP for a smaller program. So first thing, don't assume that you don't spend enough. It's worth engaging a couple of MSP providers to have that conversation. But second, if outsourcing isn't right for you, but you obviously still want to mitigate the risk because any number of workers can present some risk, then I would encourage you to still either reach out to some of the MSP providers and see if they offer any sort of advice or consulting. Staffing Industry Analyst is a great resource for getting information about contingent workforce, and generally just sort of participating in various webinars and soaking up as much information as you can out there. There's lots of information that will help drive how you manage your contingent workforce, particularly as it comes to independent contractors. There are organizations that just deal in that, so it's worth taking a look at the whole of your workforce and seeing how you can mitigate your risk. So let's see, waiting on a few more questions. So here's one. How do I know if I should outsource or just upskill my internal talent? And I'll give an answer on this. And Kelly, you may have some insights, as I'm sure you went through the internal or external thought process. But I would say one of the things that you need to look at is whether or not you have the bandwidth and the budget within your internal teams to be able to do it. One of the challenges we see a lot is companies will add contingent workforce as a bit of a side job for someone, and then over time the program quickly deteriorates because it's not an area of focus for anyone, and for such a large spend category presenting so much risk, that can be very challenging. So I don't know, Kelly, if you have any other insights on that from Sony.
Yeah, I mean, from a Sony perspective, it was, for us, again, we have issues around co-employment over in the UK as well, so we were very keen to work with a partner that was able to help manage that level of risk for us. It was also, we needed someone who could support us around the compliance piece and making sure that we had, contractors had limited companies in the right locations and also were liable and were paying the right amount of tax. So we just didn't have that expertise in-house, and it's a lot simpler to hand it over to somebody who really genuinely knows what they're doing. We are, that wasn't our key skill base, and for us it's worked brilliantly to hand that over to someone who is more expert in that field.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So let's see, we've got one more. What happens to my current team if I choose to outsource to an MSP, for example? It's an interesting question. The answer is it depends. For a lot of our clients, what we end up seeing is the current team, because it's been a bit of a side job for someone, they just continue on with their primary day job. In other cases, we've worked it out where the current internal team has come to work for the MSP, or where they've been able to be redeployed within the organization. As I said, if there's a program that's currently running really well internally, then there's less of a conversation about the outsourcing. But generally speaking, where we're coming in and looking at changing internal processes, it's because things aren't working well, which generally means you don't have the dedicated team and the dedicated resources. But if you do, there's various ways that that can be addressed. Those were the questions that have come in. Any other questions? Okay, what do you think might be the next big thing in MSP programs? That's a very good question. So the things that people are talking about, one, there's and has been for a long time, the conversations around including statement of work in the MSP programs. And this is an interesting problem in that it is a non-employee workforce coming into the organization, but the statements of work can range from 1 or 2 people to very large multi-million-dollar projects. So fitting those into an MSP can vary pretty widely. But the reality of it is organizations need to know who's working for them, where, and what they're engaged in doing. So I think that's going to continue to trickle into the MSP programs. A couple of other things that we see, one trend that we've seen across Europe that I think is going to become much more prevalent in the U.S. is it's been labeled contingent RPO or direct sourcing. It's got a few different flavors, but basically it's a new way of sourcing talent, so going straight to the talent from the MSP program as opposed to using staffing suppliers. With the advent of some of the freelancer management systems and the human cloud and sort of the self-curating talent pools, it's becoming increasingly efficient to engage directly with the talent. So I think that's going to be the next big thing to drive cost savings in a lot of the MSPs. And then just the overall freelancer management systems and bringing that level of worker into the program is going to be big. Anything else? Okay. Well, with that, I think that's about all the time we've got, but I thank you for joining us today. As was mentioned at the beginning of the call, the video recording of this will be available on our YouTube channel, and then also feel free to reach out to us to gain more information. We can be found at hayestalentsolutions.com, including an introduction guide to outsourcing and a resourcing diagnostic to help your organization, help you identify your organizational needs. So with that, I thank you all very much and have a wonderful rest of your week.